This is Good Together, the podcast that inspires you to create change in the world every day. Keep listening for actionable tips and tricks to incorporate eco-friendly practices into your daily life. We've recently been featured by Apple as the #1 podcast for conscious consumers, and we can't wait to welcome you into our community of changemakers. I'm your co-host, Laura Alexander Wittig, founder of Brightly.eco, the new platform for conscious consumers. We believe in supporting all creatures, great and small, and our team of experts show you how to consume and shop responsibly by recommending world-changing products, brands, and more. To read show notes from Good Together and to browse all of the world-changing goodness that we feature, head to brightly.eco/podcast. This episode is part 2 of our 2019 Year in Review theme, where Lisa and I highlight positive and negative themes that emerged in the ethical and sustainable news cycles. We also invited Alden Wicker to weigh in alongside us. Alden is an investigative journalist, ethical fashion expert, and founder of ecocult.com, one of the top sources for in-depth reporting on everything eco-friendly. Like we mentioned in part 1, Alden has written a piece or two for the Brightly.eco platform, and we're longtime fans of her knack of getting to the bottom of nebulous issues and asking the hard questions needed to advance our collective knowledge of sustainable lifestyle practices. Alden doesn't shy away from a controversial issue, and that's why we invited her on this podcast. In the second part of our discussion with Alden, we discussed the rise of ethical alternatives to fast fashion, the exciting increase in popularity of clean eating through meat alternatives, and the impact Amazon.com had on your online shopping this year, plus what that means for the planet. Let's get started.
So moving on to fast fashion, supply chains, right, exciting stuff. Also, we're nerds about that. Laura, you want to start with, kind of the negative side of things, and we'll see what we're doing about it.
Yeah, so we're talking a little bit about fast fashion, like we said we would earlier. And so one thing that came out, which is almost like a half positive, half negative. So the positive thing was there was a really, there've been some explosive reports coming out of China, specifically in a region called, I'm gonna say this. I did take a semester of Mandarin, and I was not that great at it. Xinjiang, I think, is the name of that region.
That's pretty impressive.
And there is an ethnic group there called the Uyghurs, and they are they have occupied that space forever. And unfortunately, the Chinese government has come in and started to use this group as, more or less slave labor. So I say the positive is that this information is coming to light, specifically tying it back to consumer behavior. So as it turns out, a lot of these factories are producing garments that are getting fed directly to us in the US and across the world through some of these fast fashion chains. This region of China actually produces over 80% of China's cotton. And in turn, the United States actually imports more than 30% of our overall apparel from China. This is something that, the solve for this, of course, is less apparent. Obviously, we need some policy, in effect, from our government to really push on the Chinese government to stop these practices. But as consumers, we can, again, not support fast fashion. Make sure that the supply chain that is, giving you your fashion. I think it's just fascinating. It's heartbreaking. Alden, I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Oh, I have so much to say on this topic.
Yeah.
So it's not just the cut and sew factories that are using slave labor. Also, it's the spinning mills and the cotton harvesting. And there was a really massive story that I don't think a lot in the fashion community saw come out because it's in Foreign Policy magazine, and so it was really savaging the Better Cotton Initiative because the Better Cotton Initiative it doesn't really much focus on forced labor. It focuses on like pesticide use and stuff, but it was kind of providing a little bit of a smokescreen for brands like Adidas and H&M to say that the cotton that they're sourcing from this area is sustainable. And they've done everything sort of correct, quote unquote. But unfortunately, because this is a communist government policy, there's no way to use normal certification systems to be sure that the cotton that you're sourcing was not harvested or spun or cut and sewn using slave labor. And really, the only solution is to stop sourcing anything from this, not only this entire region, but any of the Chinese supply chains that feed into it. Is that possible? Probably not. I mean, China is our biggest supplier of fashion, and not just fast fashion, luxury fashion, mid-range fashion. There's starting to be a little bit towards this. The customs actually blocked the shipment, a very small shipment, but they blocked shipment of some fashion that they said they strongly suspected came from a slave labor factory in China. But the whole region and basically all of China is compromised in this. And we're sort of letting it happen because it would be a lot. I mean, just the tariff war has been really devastating to fashion brands and is increasing prices in the United States for a lot of things. Totally cutting off things from China, anything that you would suspect has been touched by slave labor, would be a massive blow to the industry, massive.
And I think whenever we get into politics, it's just, the decision-making process is so long and painful. And this is why ultimately, I mean, at least I believe, is as consumers and members of the society, that the best thing ultimately for us is just simply to vote with our dollar. Maybe we should sign petitions and definitely email the brands we like to demand action, but political process, it's not as fast as we need it to be, right?
Yeah, I think, Lisa, to that point, I think everybody has a degree what they're comfortable doing in terms of advocacy or voting with their dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So we obviously are big proponents here of conscious consumerism. It's why we created this podcast. But I think we really do have to not become so jaded with the political systems that we are part of, that we just kind of throw our hands up and say there's not anything we can do. And I think, so, wherever you feel like you can make a difference, you can write to your local representatives. There's all sorts of things you can do. And actually that kind of leads me into the positive spin on all of this, which is, I do think we're at a tipping point right now in society where there's absolutely, you could argue, a cultural decline of fast fashion. Now, I say cultural decline because I don't necessarily think that we have the data to say that people are stopping buying fast fashion or unethical fashion. We don't have that data at all. But at least there's been a cultural, maybe the word decline isn't the right word. Maybe more like there's been an increase. We could say it a different way. There's been an increase of cultural awareness of fast fashion and how it negatively impacts the environment. So that's probably the better way to phrase that. But it's no longer a cottage term. I would imagine you'd agree with that, Alden.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, search terms are going up. People are looking for it on. I mean, little things like Pinterest released its trends at the beginning of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, and both times they said people are looking for information on sustainable, ethical, conscious fashion. People are Googling more. I think, I think my website's really high quality, but I think also it's gotten so big because people are just hungry for information on this topic. And so I think a lot of people are talking about it. Whether or not that is translating to any meaningful change on a large scale, I have not seen that yet.
Exactly. I think the jury's still out on that, and we're going to have to wait to see whether or not people, I mean, there's always those studies done with what people say they do and what they actually do. There's also like memes, it's like what my mom thinks I do all day, what I actually do all day, those types of things. And so, yeah, I think that it's something that we can remain hopeful about, make sure that we are actively trying to make it, trying to create a change when we can. One thing that was interesting, kind of straddling the cultural component and the political component, is that the United Nations actually established this year the Alliance for Sustainable Fashion. So this is the UN coming out and saying, we are actively interested in driving the conversation forward about sustainable fashion on a global scale. And of course, there's always going to be opinions about United Nations, but the one thing that I think we can all agree on is that it is a wonderful forum to spark international conversations about big issues. So I, for one, am thrilled that they created that group.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, politics, international politics, it's a whole different discussion, but any action, any effort, I tend to agree that I just want to applaud that. So also some positive things on the decline of fast fashion and the rise of slow fashion, if you will. Google searches, of course, are going up on sustainable fashion. We see more and more brands coming up as well, right? Another thing I wanted to talk about is the rise of the reused clothing rental economy, right? The ThredUp that I mentioned earlier this episode, Rent the Runaway, it has a unicorn status, meaning that the company is valued at over $1 billion. And yeah, of course, ThredUp, I wanted to give them a shout out. They every year for the last few years, they're publishing their yearly resale report, and 2019, they are saying that secondhand market will reach $51 billion in 5 years. And of course, millennials and Gen Z are leading the charge in this market and adopting secondhand 2.5 times faster than other age groups. So I was curious, Alden, what's your take on it? Are you as hopeful on it, about it, or any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm 75% hopeful about it. I would say, I actually I haven't really rented much at all.
Me neither. Yep.
But that's only because as someone who has a blog, I'm offered free things all the time. And most of the time I say no, but my closet is great. I have an amazing closet. I did rent something once, and it was for Halloween because I couldn't afford to buy something new that was ethical, that was ethically made for my costume. So I rented it, and I was really pleased with it. The other time that I really wish I had access to it was when I was in Copenhagen for the fashion summit, and I'd been traveling a lot, and I just didn't have a cocktail dress. And I thought, oh my God, if I was in New York right now, I could just rent a cocktail dress. And so I think in a lot of those situations, it's really great. And I have friends who really like it, and it really cuts down on your buying trendy things and then realizing you don't like them. The 25% where I'm a little bit negative on it is this, it sort of accelerates the fashion cycle even further and makes people value their clothes even less, because it just doesn't matter. Like, you own it, you give it back. And there's also no data, again, showing that it is more sustainable than buying
anything, right?
Not buying anything, but like maybe not buying anything, but like buying some things that you like really love and take care of. And so I would love to see research that really compares those two different lifestyles and sees what exactly is going on with it, and if it's leading to lower consumption of resources, or if it's just sort of like fast fashion in a different form.
Yeah, I totally agree with that point, Alden. And the other thing I wanted to mention was there's an interesting conversation actually happening in the Facebook community where somebody had shared, an article talking about, again, the rise of these rental companies. And, to what the point that we were trying to make is, I think at first glance, it does seem more ethical because you don't feel like you're buying things. However, the point I wanted to add was somebody commented, and it was fascinating. I'd never thought about this too, but somebody was like, honestly, their point of view was, honestly, they thought that one of the reasons we've seen a rise in these companies has been it's because it's a good business model, right?
Yeah.
They're able to have
Great.
almost a subscription based revenue, and so for them, for a lot of these companies springing up, it may or may not be because they want to actually make a difference. It's because it's a good business model, and some of these companies, so I know that there's been a few popping up that are utilizing like fast fashion in the rental items that you get anyway. So anyway, there's definitely pros and cons. I totally agree with it from like a formal wear perspective. I've also rented something one time. My husband used to be in the military, and we had to go to a lot of balls, which sounds very fun, but it was a little bit intimidating in terms of trying to find formal wear all the time, like, just awful. So I would rent things from time to time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally
as
think
you
it's an
know,
interesting piece.
as you know me, like on the consumer end, if rental is actually a positive thing for the environment, which I kind of feel like it is definitely better than buying new, I want to see brands to make it as frictionless as possible and as easy of a process as possible for it to be really massive and reach all the consumers at large. Because yeah, I myself personally, I think I tried Latote once for a couple of months, but again, I'm not a super fashion addict, so that's not for me for sure. And then yeah, the whole process of returning stuff back just like scares me. So that's why for me personally, that's why I see is the biggest kind of challenge for this kind of businesses. But
There's
do you
also
guys
something
want?
else that I'm a little bit more excited about than the
Mm-hmm.
rental, which is this trend of fashion brands taking back their old stuff that people don't want
Yes,
anymore and refurbishing.
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, and so ThreadUp has that program. I think that just started this year. So basically, even if you're shopping from, I don't remember what their partners are. Well, Reformation, like on the ethical brand side, but brands like I think it's Macy's maybe or Dillard's or one of those brands. Basically, you can. Return your Dillard stuff to ThreadUp because I think the operations are pretty good and sophisticated in terms of again processing all of the stuff that you don't want. Shall we get into the food area, which we are very excited about? Laura?
Yeah, go ahead. I
Uh,
mean, I don't know if you want to lead this one, but I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, so before we start talking about your favorite burger, in general, there is definitely, well, it's kind of like a negative, positive thing. Well, healthy diet, good news for everyone who is trying to be healthy and needs more motivation, like me. Healthy diet means a healthy planet too, right? And there's studies shown, obviously we will have all the articles and kind of research pieces that we're going off in this episode. We'll share it in the show notes for you guys. But basically, healthy diet is better for the environment too. And the article breaks down specific products like is red meat better than chicken or for the environment, or fish or dairy? And basically, the answer is healthy stuff. Of course, grains, vegetables, fruits, potatoes, my favorite thing. Fish and chicken goes a bit towards the unhealthier side, but of course I think a lot of us, we already know that unprocessed red meat and processed red meat are the kind of the worst things for the environment. And they're good trends, right? We're switching our diets. There's veganism, there's vegetarians, and one company that broke the news, became the news darling this year is the Impossible Burger. Laura, you want to tell them a bit about that?
Yeah, no, I'm just laughing because she's handing me this one on a silver platter, pun intended. I love Impossible Burger. Just personally, I like the way it tastes. I think there have been interesting questions brought up about how ethical and sustainable it actually is. But in addition to the way it tastes, I love that it started a conversation. Both Impossible Burger, there's also Beyond Meat. There's so many companies that kind of came out in the past few years. But the really important thing I think to get across is the fact that they're starting these conversations and they're getting people to see that it is possible to eat plant-based meat alternatives that don't taste tasteless. And so an example that I have for this is I was out with a group of my friends. They're a group of male engineers. These guys were pretty set in their ways, and we were all going out to eat, and we were at a burger shop. And I love traditional burgers. I love any burgers of any kind. And I saw that they had an Impossible Burger, and so I ordered one, and I convinced a few of these guys to get Impossible Burgers, and they were kind of like, they were curious. First of all, they were curious, and I didn't have to pull their arm too much. So one, I think that speaks to the fact that they had heard about this, and that, you know, the marketing behind Impossible Burgers / all these meat alternatives was interesting and piquing their interest. So they got it, and they were blown away. I mean, they literally were like, this is something I could see myself eating more of. And so regardless if they choose to eat Impossible Burger or whatever it is, it kind of got them to see that a life without or life with less meat, again, we're not saying you have to remove meat from your diet, but a life with less meat was possible. And so that's what I think has been so interesting to see this year. Obviously, more and more people are becoming vegans, like Lisa was talking about. Alden, I'm curious. I don't know actually a lot about your eating habits. What's your take on this?
I think it's pretty cool. I mean, already we've seen the decline of red meat consumption in the United States, but not for environmental reasons, mostly because people now believe that it will make them fat and give them cancer, and there's a lot of evidence of that. So I think that's why. People aren't necessarily eating less meat overall. They've switched to chicken, but that's a great thing for the environment. And I think it's also better for our health. If you want to know about my personal eating habits, I'm a flexitarian. I have a CSA box delivered to our apartment every Monday with recipes. And I don't eat meat unless I'm pretty confident in where it comes from. And I'll eat meat like once a day at the most, and that's if like it came in the CSA. And I'm pretty confident in that decision. People get really surprised when I say I'm not a vegan, but I'm not a vegan because I've looked at everything and I feel confident in the way. If everyone ate like I did, we would be perfectly fine.
There you go. And I mean, I think the fact that people, I guess the previous thought was, okay, if you want to be an agent of change for the world through your eating habits, you kind of have to be a vegetarian. That was years ago. And then we started to have the rise of veganism, which is even more of a commitment than vegetarianism. And so I think a lot of folks who wanted to make an impact weren't 100% sure how to do it. And so I love that you talk about wanting to know more about where your meat is from before you eat it. And I think in general, just being flexible, I think is helpful for most people, because let's be real. Like, I think trying to have a major lifestyle change of any type is difficult. We're about to get into the new year and have New Year's resolutions and all of that. So yeah, I think that any way that you can, be a bit more conscious in that respect, I think is really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also not a vegetarian, and I do love meat, and I just basically, similar to Alden, maybe I don't know exactly where the meat comes from, but basically my policy is like just buy the most expensive meat at Whole Foods, which is of course not very good for your wallet, but it does take a lot of financial power to be able to eat really high quality foods here. And also wanted to give a shout out to, Leonardo DiCaprio as usual. He invested not into the Impossible Burger, but in Beyond Meat, which is Impossible Burger's competitor, and which I just realized they went public like 3 months ago and gained 840% in their stock price. So, money talks. So I think this also kind of gives me hope that more and more people are actually willing to make these lifestyle changes. And Burger King also launched the Impossible Burger as well, so which is all, of course, huge news. I think these are all the things that we wanted to mention.
Actually, right? I think, Lisa, there was one more that we wanted to chat about, and that was both the, it's one of these mixed bags, whether or not it's positive or negative. So it was about Amazon and online shopping. So we have an episode that talks specifically about online shopping. there are so many things in that episode that we said that we need to make their own episode. So one of our goals next year is to kind of go back into our podcast and make sure that we are making good on our word. So we're excited about that. But I wanted to say that we just kind of came off of Cyber Monday, Black Friday time frame, excuse me. And Cyber Monday was actually Amazon's biggest shopping day they've ever had this past year.
Oh, so happy for them. No.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, so I think this points to, again, when I think about people wanting to shop at Amazon, I think everybody, if you've listened to the podcast before, you know I used to work at Amazon for quite a few years, and my thought here is people want convenience. Lisa talked about that just a second ago. I know Alden talks about it all the time, but when we think about what people actually want to do, they want to do what's easiest and what works for them. And so for most people, that's Amazon. Amazon is the main place people go to search for products. I think Google is trying to make some inroads in making shopping a little bit easier on Google. So my fingers are crossed that people can have a better way to search for products. But for many people, Amazon remains the easiest way to shop and the most reliable. And so one of the things that we, when we think about trying to maybe mitigate a little bit of this, because as we know, having one company control so much of the just commerce world is not good. Amazon also sources from crazy unethical supply chains in addition to powering ethical brands. So they kind of operate in many spheres. When I say powering, I just mean offering a sales channel. I don't think they've put a stake in the ground on actually doing much in that
well,
regard.
They also rip off some sustainable brands. Did you see they came out with their faux Allbirds shoe?
Oh, yes. Let's talk about that. You want to explain that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, so Amazon's been accused of using the data that it sees on its platform to rip off the highest performing brands and offer like an in-house fake, which is so messed up. And that's why a lot of brands refuse to sell on Amazon, because they don't want to give away their data. It sucks because, as you said, so the Wall Street Journal did an investigative report, and they found that Amazon sellers were sourcing from the types of dangerous factories in Bangladesh that H&M and Gap will not touch.
Yeah, that was the crazy part. And I think that those, every time we hear the news about Amazon, it's never good, or maybe they try to do a little bit of greenwashing. And I hate to be the downer here, but yeah, first of all, they tried to steal Allbirds design, and kudos to Allbirds founders. They were like, hey, Jeff Bezos, why don't you steal our technology, which they made open source, right? The innovation in textiles and supply chains. Why don't you steal that instead of stealing our designs? And then, yes, the factories that are blacklisted and other US companies are never working with Amazon, still able to somehow bypass this regulation and work with them. I also just heard about, there were a lot of news about that. A lot of reviews are fake on Amazon as well. So I don't know. Should we keep going on Amazon or switch to more online shopping in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I also want to mention too is, if you're going to use Amazon, because you are, let's be real. You definitely are. We recommend trying to make sure that you try to batch your purchases so that you're not having to create a bunch of different shipping, deliveries up to your house as much as you can, although you don't really have much control over that. So at least it's one thing that you can try to do. Another thing is you can try and shop from ethical brands that choose to use Amazon as supply chains as a marketing channel. Because like I said, there is a lot of money to be made selling through Amazon. You do definitely open yourself up to risk. And, as a seller, getting things ripped off, unfortunately. So yeah, I mean, whenever possible, shop local, try not to shop on Amazon. But I think we have to be realistic and realize that most people will, it is what it is. And so, the more you can show Amazon that you support ethical brands, the better. I think that actually wraps up the the overall year in review. I don't know. So actually, Lisa and I are doing a new thing where we'd like to ask our guests, 3 different questions, so that you can kind of help our audience leave on a particularly interesting note. So the first question, Alden, for you is, I wondered if you could share 1 or 2 actionable tips for our audience, for them to live more ethically and sustainably.
Sure. I'm thinking this one's going to be a little bit esoteric, but I've been thinking a lot lately about efficiency and how I think it's been a trap. I think we've been told that if we are more efficient, we'll have more time to do the things we love. But I think it's the opposite, that if we carve out time to do the things we love, then we will be forced to be more efficient in the rest of our life. And so I've been thinking a lot lately about how sometimes my favorite moments are when I allow myself to be inefficient and do some things the slow way, whether it's not going to Amazon and instead going to the local kitchen store in my neighborhood to like look at what coffee mocha pots they have there, or it's putting away my phone and like taking the time to like take a bubble bath with a book, instead of like going to Twitter. So I know that's more of like wellness, but I think the striving for efficiency and speed is a lot of what leads us to make decisions that are poor for the environment and people as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it also comes with age, but I've been thinking about the same things more and more, like slowing down, but also recognizing how difficult it is to train yourself to do these things, right? To put down the phone, pick up the book, and all of these things. All right. My question, one of my favorite ones, is for Alden, of course. It's all for you. Can you tell us, maybe give a shout out to your favorite brand or ethical product, and why? What are they doing right that you're most excited about?
It's like asking me to choose a favorite child from my
I know.
200 foster children.
Well, it doesn't have to be like greatest of all time too. It could just be like one that you found recently. Like you don't have to have too much pressure.
Yeah. No, I was giving this some thought. And so I'm going to give a shout out to Nisolo. Nisolo is a brand that I've known about for a long time. And they've just always been the most dependable brand in terms of making beautiful leather footwear, and now some jewelry and accessories, but mostly really comfortable, well-made, beautiful, classic footwear. And they also have a campaign with Able right now, around trying to get fashion brands to say who is being paid the least in their supply chain and what that wage is. And I think it's a really cool campaign because it makes it very simple to understand what's going on in the supply chain. And I think it's the first step towards having a better conversation around living wage and how rare it is.
Yeah, we are definitely, there's a lot of Nisolo fans. I think all of us on the call own a few pairs of Nisolos. And I think it's especially like, first of all, they have amazing product, but the second part is, I think for all of us, it's important, all the other steps that they're doing to do things right. And this like minimum wage challenge is it. One more question, and we will be done. What is the one thing that excites you right now the most in the ethical and sustainable movement? Just one thing.
I'm going to be a big old dork for this one, and I'm going to talk about the Bangladesh Fire and Safety Accord and the Bangladesh Alliance to a lesser extent. So after Rana Plaza collapsed in Bangladesh and killed over 1,100 people, fashion brands were thinking, okay, we have 2 choices. Either we keep manufacturing here knowing this could happen at any time again, or we pull out. And so they created these 2 organizations to basically do what the government was supposed to do, which is inspect factories and require safety remediations. And the fact that, especially with the accord, that it was legally binding and had a power sharing agreement with labor unions, it's like this modern, powerful international labor agreement for a modern globalized world. And it worked. Average deaths per year from factory incidents went from 100 to 0. It is in danger of being dismantled right now, and we're starting to see the cracks show in that safety facade. There was an explosion this week, actually, at a knitwear factory, and one person died because of a human error, but they should have known better than to do what they were doing. So it's excitement because it opened the door to a really powerful way to fix fashion industry issues, not only in our own country, but in other countries. But I still have like a little bit of trepidation about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great note to end on because as we know, this is just such a constantly evolving conversation and culture. And I love that you decided to shine a light on the recent events there because I was reading a few articles about that too. So we'll put that in the show notes for people who are interested in following up more. Well, we have just gone through so much. I'm just so thrilled that we were able to kind of get some cohesive themes together. Like always, we will have show notes and more information available on Brightly.eco. Alden, I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Thank you, Alden.
Awesome.
Looking forward
Thanks.
to all the feedback for this kind of double episode.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Good Together. As always, you can get show notes and explore lots more content related to all things eco-friendly living by checking out brightly.eco/podcast. While you're visiting, don't forget to join in on the conversation by leaving us a question through voicemail or giving us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and all the social channels. Our username is brightly.eco. Finally, we want to leave you with a reminder. Every day is a chance for you to create change, and you're already covered for today since you joined us here on the podcast. Stay kind and live brightly.